Every time I watch a movie built around hope, things like Superman, Wonder Woman, Spider-Man, Captain America, I notice something a little bit strange that I want to talk about today. That being, it should be easy to write a hopeful character. It should be easy to make someone inspiring, but it is not. Somewhere in the last 20 years, writing heroes who stand for genuine optimism became one of the hardest tasks in Hollywood. Not because audiences no longer want hope, but because our cultural storytelling has changed in ways we rarely talk about. So today, I want to break down why hope is so difficult to write, in my opinion, why cynical antiheroes are often easier and have become far more popular, and why optimistic characters feel either too naive or too sanitized. And most importantly, what it actually takes to write a hero who feels hopeful and who feels real. Now, there's a myth in Hollywood that audiences don't like hopeful characters anymore. And that's not true. People love hopeful heroes, but they don't love unearned hope. The world has changed. Audiences today live in economic anxiety, political division, social burnout, overwhelming information, and institutional distrust. So when a hero smiles and says, "Everything will be okay," without any real struggle or justification, it just feels fake. We no longer accept simple optimism because the real world is not that simple. Modern writing avoids vulnerability at all costs, and hope requires vulnerability. Characters quip instead of feel, scripts avoid sincerity, stories rush the emotional beats, and trauma becomes a prop more than an arc. But hope without vulnerability isn't hope. It's advertising. Cynicism feels easier because cynical characters admit the world is broken, they will deflect emotion, avoid moral responsibility. They rely on things like sarcasm, and they avoid risk. Optimism requires that courage. Cynicism requires none of that. And audiences can tell the difference. Now, why does old-fashioned optimism feel outdated? Well, that's because it has to evolve. Hopeful characters from earlier eras, like Christopher Reeve's Superman, early Disney protagonists, 90s superhero icons, they all thrived in a cultural environment that believed in clear moral binaries. Good versus evil, right versus wrong. Courage conquers, kindness wins. But modern audiences know the world isn't that simple. So when heroes behave like nothing is complicated, they feel out of place. An example would be the Golden Boy problem. This is, characters who always do the right thing, they never question themselves, never consider nuance, and they never have to adapt. They just feel static and shallow. Hope cannot exist without conflict. When characters face no internal temptation, no moral difficulty, no fear of failure, their optimism becomes a cartoon version of the real thing. But here's the biggest issue I see across modern blockbusters, which is kind of a perfect segue because if you haven't seen my last video on what happened to the modern blockbuster, you should check that out. But, hope is mistakenly written as positivity, but positivity is not hope. Positivity is confidence without evidence. Everything will work out. Just stay positive. That's not hope. That's delusion. And sometimes I even find myself being like that. Hope, however, is choosing to believe despite evidence. And this is the real definition. Recognizing the darkness. Acknowledging the fear of the unknown or the fear of what might go wrong. Facing the worst when it does, or if it does go wrong. And still choosing to act in the midst of all of that. Hope is not naive, as the stuff I mentioned above. Hope is defiant. And the three ingredients of real hopeful heroes, in my opinion, are, number one, they have to see the world honestly. They don't downplay danger, corruption, or trauma, but they also do not let that corrupt them. Number two, they feel the weight of it. They struggle, they doubt themselves, and they question everything. And number three, they choose to rise anyway. As I mentioned, They decide the world is worth fighting for, and they decide that, even with all of these doubts, with all of these roadblocks and these things in the way, they still choose kindness. They still choose to act with some braveness, and it's very inspiring. Without these three elements, hope just becomes hollow. And while we're talking about it, villains have become more compelling than the heroes. And this kind of reveals a lot about hope. Modern audiences gravitate toward villains and anti-heroes because they have something hopeful characters often lack nowadays. That being stuff like internal conflict, ideology, personal stakes, and a clear worldview. If we think about, modern villains, the ones that come to mind for me are Killmonger, Joker, whether you want to pick Ledger or Joaquin Phoenix. We don't really talk about the one in the middle there. Zod, Thanos, Green Goblin, Homelander, and Omni-Man. They all operate from things like pain, purpose, trauma, philosophy, logic twisted by emotional wounds. And on the other side of the coin, many heroes operate from things like obligation, fate, responsibility, or the script just says so. Villains just feel more human because they feel more, they just feel more. Hopeful heroes who don't feel become mascots more than actual characters. Now, there are two commonly failed archetypes when it comes to hope. Nearly every failed hopeful hero falls into one of these two traps. Number one being the perfect saint archetype. This one is, always moral, correct, never struggles, they never contradict themselves, they never doubt, and they never change. This character is supposed to be inspiring, but just ends up being emotionally inaccessible. If a character doesn't wrestle with the darkness, they can't triumph over it. And number two being the corporate mascot, as I previously mentioned. This is when a studio wants a hero to represent the brand, so the character becomes very sanitized, overly safe, quippy, overly quippy to be honest, non-controversial, non-political, and conflict-free. They stop being a person and start being a product. There's almost like no soul to it. And hope can't come from a product. It can only come from a person. Now, the natural solution is a well-written, hopeful hero. That's all it takes. And that's the good news. Modern audiences want hopeful heroes. They just want them written well. I don't think people have gotten bored of the hero. I don't think people have gotten... It's the same thing with superhero movies. I don't think there's such a thing as superhero fatigue. I think it's just people are sick of watching dog shit. It's like the same thing with... you could say that with anything that people, quote unquote, are sick of. Like Call of Duty. I don't think people have a Call of Duty fatigue. I think they have a shitty Call of Duty fatigue. They're sick of the games being abysmal dog shit. So let's break down the 5 elements every great optimistic character needs in today's storytelling climate, in my opinion. First element we're going to talk about is a relatable wound. Hope is only powerful when it's chosen in response to pain or to, as I mentioned before, like adversary or something to overcome in life. Great hopeful heroes carry fear, they carry trauma and loss and insecurity and guilt. They aren't perfect by any means, but their wounds anchor their optimism in reality. Some examples of this would be, Peter Parker's guilt, Steve Rogers' loneliness, and Diana's compassion born from war. Now, the second element would be a moral philosophy. A hopeful hero needs a worldview strong enough to withstand conflict. This isn't vague goodness, it's an ideology. Something like, everyone is worth saving, or I don't kill, or mercy is strength, or there's always a better way. Hope must be rooted in a belief, and some people don't like these beliefs, specifically the I don't kill or there's always a better way. And, to those people, I would just say it's a very nihilistic way to view things because The whole point of this video is how difficult it is to be hopeful, how difficult it is to have these ideals and these, these beliefs. Now, the third element is a direct challenge to that philosophy. A hopeful hero must face a villain or a system or a situation or something that specifically tests that ideology. If a hero believes people can change, then the villain must be someone who rejects that redemption. If a hero believes life is precious, then the story must force them to confront helplessness. Very popular with, obviously, Batman and Joker. Their philosophy must be placed under fire in order for it to be compelling. The fourth element is a moment of doubt. Every great hopeful hero has or should have a moment where they break down. They consider giving up. They question their ideals and they lose their faith. This moment doesn't make them weak, but it shows the audience that they are human. Now, the fifth element and the final element that I want to talk about is the choice to believe. And this is finally where the hero chooses hope. Not because it's easy, or because it's naive, or because they're perfect, but because they decided that this world is worth fighting for, that these people are worth fighting for. That choice is not rainbows or cliches or speeches. It's what makes hope powerful. Writing hopeful characters is not outdated or childish or boring, but it is hard. Because real hope, the kind that actually means something, requires conflict, vulnerability, doubt, courage, clarity, and sacrifice. And when a writer commits to that journey, the rest is unforgettable. Characters like Superman, Wonder Woman, Spider-Man, Diana Prince, Steve Rogers, they endure because they remind us not of what the world is, but what it can be. And I will admit, they also adapt well to the times. Hope is not obsolete. Hope is timeless. We've just forgotten how to write it. That's pretty much all I had to say on this topic today. Something a little bit more random, but something I was thinking about. Let me know what you guys think down below. Do you agree with what I had to say? Do you not? Why or why not? Who are some of your favorite hopeful characters? I mean, for me, it's kind of crazy to think about him in this way, but truly my favorite hopeful character is my favorite superhero of all time, and that is Batman. I think Batman is a great example of hope, persevering through literally the worst times. Obviously, you have people like Spider-Man, a very obvious choice. Superman is a great choice. There's a lot of great examples of hope in heroes. And I think that's why, my younger self and my older self now gravitates towards superhero stories so much, or, the most, because of just how inspiring these hopeful stories can be. Hopefully you guys are not completely, nihilistic and you haven't given up on the world, because there truly is good in the world and there's good people worth fighting for. So, not going to get too philosophical because I'm not a genius. I am far from it, but that is my opinion on this topic. Like I said, if you stuck around this long, I do appreciate your time. It means a lot that you care about what I have to say, but I also care about what you have to say. So be sure to let me know down below. And until next time, guys, I'll see you.